It starts with sunshine. Late morning, a line of cars snakes toward the entrance of a state park that sells itself as an easy escape from the city. Picnic smoke hangs in the air, kids race between minivans, someone is trying to coax a stubborn dog out of the back seat. Mara waits her turn in that line, fingers tapping the steering wheel in time with the local radio station. She knows this drive. She's posted it to her feed more times than she can count. Same road, same sign, same caption about needing fresh air more than caffeine. The entrance camera catches her car at 10:47 a.m. Clear plates, clear weather. Nothing unusual, which is exactly what makes days like this so dangerous in memory. They blur together. She parks in the gravel overflow lot, the one that always seems half-flooded with melted snow or yesterday's rain. Today, though, it's just dust and sunlight. Around her, trunks slam, hiking poles clack. Someone laughs too loud about forgetting sunscreen. Mara moves on autopilot. She pops the trunk, swings her day pack onto the bumper. Shoes, laces, that one knee brace she pretends she doesn't need, tucked under leggings. She walks to the line of metal hang lockers bolted to a cinder block wall, feeds quarters into the slot, feels the resistance as the key turns. Inside, she leaves her wallet, a book she's halfway through, an extra cert. She keeps her phone, her water bottle, a thin rain shell. This is a loop she's done before. It's a Saturday, it's crowded, and she tells herself there is nothing risky about being out on a well-marked trail within shouting distance of families grilling hot dogs. At 11:13 a.m., she pauses at the wooden trail map only because everyone else does. The sign is faded, arrows pointing toward trail names that sound more poetic than precise. She raises her phone, snaps a quick selfie, baseball cap, sunglasses, a strip of blue sky over her shoulder. She sends it to a group chat. Finally out here again. If I'm not back by Monday, I live in the woods now. It lands with the exact kind of joke you make when the woods, to you, are a break from real danger. From traffic, from work, from the news. Somewhere between that text and sunset, Mara disappears. By early evening, the park is emptying. The grills go cold. A ranger making a routine sweep of the lots notices a car still parked in the same spot, same plates as the morning. The air has turned, clouds stacking up along the ridge. The door is locked. On the driver's side floorboard, just visible through the glass, lies a small metal key with a plastic tag from the day locker wall. Her car is here. Her locker is still full. Mara is nowhere.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is Rise Stories. Hey everyone, I'm Samnang Bradley, your host, researcher and investigator, and you just heard Alona walk us into the kind of scenario that keeps a lot of hikers, and honestly, a lot of investigators awake at night.
And I'm James Bradley, your true crime co-pilot on this ride, unraveling the mystery one clue at a time. If you felt your stomach drop a little when that locker key showed up on the floor of the car, same here. Because on paper, Mara's day looks so ordinary that it almost disappears into the background. But the ending does not.
Before we go any further, we need to be really clear about something. Mara is not one real, identifiable person. She is a composite, carefully anonymized, from details we've pulled out of multiple unsolved disappearances and suspicious deaths connected to state and national parks. That means there is no single park here to go hunting for, no trailhead to geolocate, no hashtag to dive into at 2 a.m.
Yeah, and as someone who writes about real cases, I want to underline that with a big red pen. We built Mara by blending elements from different cases, different states, different years. She's meant to protect families who've already lived a version of this nightmare, not to give internet sleuths a new puzzle to solve. Behind every headline is a human story. We don't want anyone reverse engineering trauma.
Exactly. So if your brain is already doing that thing where it's trying to match this to a news story or a YouTube documentary you saw, take a breath, step back. We're not naming parks, we're not naming jurisdictions. We're looking at patterns in how a person can vanish between a crowded parking lot and a trail, and how systems respond or don't.
Every crime tells a story, and in this episode, the story is as much about institutions as it is about one hiker. We're going to walk through Mara's last known hours, talk about how managed wilderness can still be full of investigative blind spots, and ask what justice looks like when there's no single villain to point to. Alona set the scene. Now, let's rewind and start building the timeline.
All right, timeline mode. Let's hit the big anchors we know. We've got the entrance camera at 10:47 a.m. Mara's car coming through the main gate like every other weekend warrior. That gives us a clean, objective timestamp.
Then we have the trail selfie at 11:13 a.m., sent to a group chat. That's huge because it does a couple of things at once. One, it narrows her location to a specific trail system, or at least a trailhead area based on the map behind her. Two, it gives us proof of life and general demeanor. She's joking. She's not texting something like, "This feels wrong, I'm turning back."
And 3, it tells us something about her relationship to this place. She's not broadcasting a once-in-a-lifetime expedition. She's doing a casual, repeatable loop that she's comfortable enough to make a joke about getting lost in. That matters for how people, including law enforcement, interpret her risk level later.
Now, let's talk about weather, because the sky is almost like a silent character in a lot of these cases. On the day we modeled this from, forecasts showed a chance of pop-up afternoon storms. Nothing dramatic, the kind of thing you scroll past after checking the temperature. But around midday, clouds started stacking over the ridgeline. Light changed, visibility dipped in spots. If you've ever been on a ridge when that happens, you know how fast the mood on a trail can shift.
Cell data in parks is always its own headache. But in this composite, what we're looking at is a phone that pings a tower near the park entrance in the late morning, then gets patchy. There are a couple of weak hits that could be Mara's device as she moves into a valley where coverage is spotty. Then, sometime in the early afternoon, there's just silence. No more app activity, no outgoing calls, no texts, nothing that proves she left the park on her own power.
And meanwhile, the human records are just as fuzzy. We have at least one witness who remembers a woman in a blue jacket asking if a side trail reconnected with the main loop. Another who thinks they saw someone sitting on a rock near a lookout, maybe around 1 p.m., maybe later. Memory inside a popular park is notoriously unreliable. When you pass dozens of people in a day, it's hard to be certain who you actually saw and when.
What we don't have is anything like a clean last seen moment. No friend hiking directly with her, no ranger logging her name at a summit, no selfie at the turnaround point. From an investigative standpoint, that's where the trail starts to fray.
The next anchor is the evening discovery. Ranger does a sweep of the lot, sees Mara's car still sitting there. It's now hours past the kind of day hike window you'd expect for someone just doing the loop in a crowded, well-marked state park. He checks the plate, calls it in, maybe does a quick walk around. He spots that little locker key on the floorboard. That's the moment this stops being, they're running late, and starts being, we might have an overdue hiker.
And what happens next depends a lot on the invisible map of authority over that park. Because managed wilderness doesn't mean one clear chain of command. It can mean overlapping circles that don't always talk well to each other.
Yeah, let's pull the curtain back on that a bit. When you hear the phrase state park, it sounds simple, but in practice, a lot of these places are split up like a patchwork quilt. You've got park rangers who answer to a parks department. You've got a county sheriff's office with jurisdiction over missing persons and criminal matters. Sometimes a city police department is in the mix if a boundary line runs weird. Add volunteer search and rescue teams who train independently and get called in as needed. Now draw a missing hiker into the center of that.
On paper, everyone wants the same thing. Find the missing person fast. But the tools they use to track that effort can be totally disconnected. Rangers might jot plate numbers and day use fees in one system. The sheriff's office keeps a separate catalog of calls. Volunteer search teams are using their own GPS tracks, sometimes recorded on phones or handheld devices that never make it into a central case file.
I've seen cases where there was literally a paper sign-in sheet tacked up at a trailhead, just a clipboard and a metal box. Hikers scribble a first name, a time, maybe a destination. Rain hits, ink smears, pages get swapped. Nobody scans it, nobody backs it up. Once the search is over, that sheet can end up in a random drawer, or honestly, the trash. 10 years later, you go to reconstruct the record, and it's like that sign-in sheet never existed.
And in Mara's composite, there's a version of that. A well-meaning ranger notes in a daily log that day locker 12 unclaimed after closing, vehicles still on premises, plate number XYZ. That log lives in a binder behind a desk. The sheriff's office opens a missing person report when family calls later and says she never came home. Those two documents might not get physically linked for days, sometimes longer, depending on the workflows and who's on shift.
And that delay isn't always dramatic. Nobody is cackling and shredding evidence in a back room. It's more like the slow bleed of information through cracks that no one person owns. In a city, we're used to cameras and credit card logs creating a lattice of data. In the woods, that lattice is made of humans remembering to write things down, and systems that may or may not talk to each other.
So while everyone is technically doing their job, rangers locking gates, deputies responding to calls, volunteers standing by, that early window where a search can really change outcomes is ticking away. And the label that gets slapped on the situation in those first few hours, that shapes everything that follows.
Right, because rarely does someone say from the jump, we have a cold case on our hands. What you hear instead are labels like, she's probably just off trail, or he likely twisted an ankle and will walk out on his own once it cools down, or they might have decided to camp overnight without telling anyone.
In Mara's story, her family starts to worry when she doesn't respond to evening texts. By the time they reach the park to check, it's late. A deputy meets them, looks at the car in the lot, hears, she hikes a lot, she knows these trails. The working label becomes overdue hiker, not abduction or crime scene. That label isn't malicious. It's drawing from a real pattern. Most overdue hikers do walk out, but it also sets the tone.
Because once you say overdue hiker, you are quietly telling everyone how scared to be. If you frame it as she's an experienced outdoors person, probably fine, you might start with a limited ground search, maybe a couple of rangers driving the access roads, a quick sweep of the main loop. Helicopters, K9 teams, specialized technical rescue units, that's a different tier. And you don't always get there if people assume this is just a navigation error that will self-resolve.
Media echoes that language too. Early headlines for cases like this often read, "Officials searching for overdue hiker," or "Rangers concerned about missing day tripper." It sounds almost gentle, less like an emergency and more like a scheduling hiccup. By the time those headlines shift, if they ever do, the initial urgency is gone.
And if days pass, the story may pivot again. If no foul play is obvious, we see phrases like likely accident, presumed exposure, or no evidence of third-party involvement. Those are careful words with big emotional consequences. For a family, it can feel like the system has decided what happened, even if no one can point to a body, a broken branch, a footprint.
Once an overdue hiker case doesn't resolve quickly, it can slide into this gray zone where it's technically still open, but in practice, it's quiet. Search operations wind down, press coverage thins out, the file gets one of those manila folders and goes to a shelf, metaphorically or literally. That's how you wake up one day and realize you're dealing with a cold case in a place that was full of people when it began.
In the middle of all that, we can't lose Mara herself. Victimology with dignity means asking who she is in a way that honors her, rather than tearing her private life apart in public. So what do we actually know in a composite like this that's fair to say?
We know she's someone for whom the outdoors is a second home, not a stunt. She has worn-in trail shoes, not box fresh. She knows which locker takes quarters, which lot fills first. She's posted this loop enough times that friends scroll past with a little heart and not much thought. We know she has people who notice when she goes silent. That group chat that got the 11:13 a.m. selfie, they're the ones who start calling, who text, "Did you make it back okay?" and feel that first cold prickle when there's no answer.
We also know she's not taking reckless cinematic risks. She's not free climbing a cliff for likes. She's not live streaming from an edge with a gusting wind. She's doing what a lot of us do on weekends, trusting the idea that a managed park comes with guardrails we can't see, trail markers, other visitors, staff nearby if something goes wrong.
And here's what we intentionally do not fill in. We don't speculate about secret relationships. We don't build entire theories on whether a breakup text months earlier meant she wanted to disappear. We don't decide from a distance what her mental health state was. Every crime tells a story, but not every private detail belongs in that story, especially when it can't be verified and only serves to shift suspicion back on to the person who's missing.
That restraint matters, because once a narrative about a missing person sets in, she was impulsive, he was depressed, they were always chasing thrills. It's hard to dislodge. And that narrative can change how much energy people feel obligated to bring to the search.
Let's dig into the tech angle, because on paper, this is supposed to be the golden age of not being able to vanish. We've got trail counters at some park entrances, little infrared or pressure sensors ticking off how many bodies pass a certain point. You've got partial CCTV near visitor centers, sometimes on park roads, fitness apps logging routes, heart rate, pace, smartwatches pinging satellites. It sounds like a net you couldn't possibly slip through.
In practice, though, it's a patchwork. That trail counter near the trailhead where Mara took her selfie, it might record 127 hikers going in for the day, 123 passing out. That tells you something is off, but not who's missing. The CCTV at the entrance might get her car going in, but there's no camera at the back service road locals sometimes use, no license plate reader at the far exit.
Her fitness app, if she uses one, could be a gold mine or a mirage. If the phone dies in a ravine, that last recorded point may not be where she actually ended up. If GPS glitches in dense canopy, you might see her teleport across the map. Investigators have to interpret that data like a weathered trail sign, helpful, but not gospel.
And then there's coverage. In cities, we get used to full bars everywhere. In a state park, it's more like islands of signal in a sea of dead zones. So when people say, well, why didn't she just call for help? Or why didn't authorities just ping her phone and find her? That's coming from an assumption that the tech blanket reaches everywhere. It doesn't.
On the investigative side, you also run into issues of access and timing. Getting detailed cell site data or app logs often requires legal process, warrants, subpoenas. That takes time, especially if at first everyone believes this is just an overdue hiker who will walk out by morning. By the time that data lands on a desk, weather has changed the terrain, footprints are gone, scent trails are weaker. The tech can point you to yesterday's problem in today's forest.
So we end up with this paradox. Trails, tech, cameras, apps, they generate tons of data points. But if those points aren't captured, centralized, and revisited over time, they can mislead as easily as they help. The difference between a clue and a distraction is what you do with it.
While all that's playing out, Mara's family is standing at the park gate. Literally sometimes. They show up and hit this invisible barrier where the jurisdictional maze we talked about earlier becomes a real emotional wall.
They might talk to a ranger who says, we're doing everything we can in the park. They might call the sheriff's office and hear, we're coordinating with the park. We'll update you when there's news. Both statements can be true, and yet the family has almost no clear picture of what's been searched, what hasn't, and who is actually in charge.
Add public messaging to that. Parks and agencies have to balance transparency with not causing panic or tanking tourism. So you might see carefully worded posts. Search efforts are ongoing for a missing day user. There is no indication of danger to the public at this time. For the family, that can feel like our loved one is missing, but the priority is reassuring everyone else that their weekend plans are safe.
And then there are the online comments. The woods are dangerous. They should have known better. People go off trail all the time. They take stupid risks. Those little sentences, typed by strangers, can quietly recast Mara from victim to cautionary tale. Someone to shake your head at rather than someone to keep searching for.
Families get pushed into advocate mode when they're already in shock. They're printing flyers, checking trailheads, negotiating interviews, trying to make sure their loved one doesn't slip out of the news entirely. Justice is a journey, not a destination, and for them, that journey often starts at a metal gate with a sign that says, "Welcome to your adventure."
So, what does better actually look like in cases like this? Not perfect, because the wilderness will always have unknowns, but better.
For starters, standardize sign-in and tracking practices. If a park is going to have trail registers, make them meaningful. Legible forms, clear prompts, name, time in, expected route, time out, and a protocol for collecting and backing that data up. That doesn't turn the woods into a surveillance zone, but it can give search teams a head start when someone doesn't return.
Second, transparent search documentation. When a search is launched, mapping which areas were covered, by whom and when, with GPS logs where possible, creates a living record. That record should not disappear into a binder. Years later, if a detective or a new search team reopens the file, they're not starting from, "Well, I heard we checked the ridge once." They have a trail of what was actually done.
I'd love to see periodic cold case reviews built into policy for park-related disappearances, not as a public spectacle, but as a scheduled discipline. Every few years, you pull the files, you rerun the data with any new tools, you re-interview if appropriate. You treat managed wilderness cases with the same seriousness as urban unsolved homicides.
And through all of that, survivor-focused communication. Families need clear points of contact, honest updates about what is and isn't happening, and language that doesn't quietly blame their loved one for stepping onto a trail. In the shadows of crime, truth awaits. But sometimes that truth lives in how we talk to the living, not just in what we find in the woods.
Listeners always ask, "Okay, but what can I do?" Especially with composite cases like this, where we're not naming a specific park or family. So let's talk about an ethical roadmap for you.
First, amplify official information. When agencies share missing person bulletins, especially for people last seen in parks or wilderness, sharing those posts without adding your own theory is actually useful. It extends the radius of people who might recognize a face or a backpack. Resist the urge to turn someone's disappearance into a riddle for your timeline.
Second, support search and rescue organizations. A lot of the folks who go out at night in bad weather to look for overdue hikers are volunteers. They rely on donations for gear, training, sometimes even gas money. If this episode sticks with you, consider finding a reputable SAR group in your area and helping them do their work, instead of trying to start your own side investigation.
Third, be mindful with your curiosity. It's natural to want answers, but emailing random parks demanding records, or DMing families you think might resemble Mara, or doxing people you decide are suspects from your couch, that's not justice. That's harm. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay within ethical lines.
And finally, take care of yourselves. For some of you, the idea of vanishing in a place that's supposed to be relaxing might hit very close to home. Maybe you hike. Maybe your partner camps. Maybe you've already walked through a missing person case up close. If you feel your chest tight while listening, it's okay to pause, step away, take a breath. Support isn't only for the families in the story. It's for you, too.
As we start to land this, I want each of us to put one assumption on the table that we hope listeners will rethink. For me, it's the idea that nature equals acceptable risk. End of story. We shrug off a lot of disappearances in parks as the cost of wanting wild spaces. I don't buy that. Yes, trails come with risk, but that shouldn't be a free pass for sloppy documentation, poor coordination, or stories that fade too fast.
Mine is about who we quietly decide is allowed to go missing. I want us to catch ourselves when we only get really invested in the cases that look like us or fit a certain narrative, young, photogenic, outdoorsy. There are a lot of people whose disappearances never get the prime time treatment, even when they vanish in the same woods. Justice is a journey, not a destination, and the path should be wide enough for all of them.
I'll add this. The assumption that if something bad happens in a park, it must have a single cinematic cause. Sometimes we want the lone predator, the dramatic twist. But often, what swallows people is a chain of small failures. Weather, miscommunication, data not shared, assumptions made too quickly. Where mystery meets reality is usually in those messy, unglamorous gaps. That's where we have the most power to change things.
Somewhere, there's a real car that never left a trailhead on a sunny afternoon, a real locker that stayed full, a real set of photos that just stopped. Mara is a composite, but the ache she represents is not. It lives in families who still check weather reports for a place their loved one might be, in rangers who remember a license plate by heart, in binders of search maps that feel heavier than paper should.
If this story moved you, and you want more conversations that try to uncover the dark side of humanity without losing sight of the humans at the center, we'd love for you to stay with us on Rise Stories. Subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss upcoming episodes. Leave us a rating or a review if you can. It helps more people find these stories, and it tells the algorithms that ethical true crime deserves space too.
And if you want to share your thoughts on this episode, keep them thoughtful and non-speculative. Talk about systems, about assumptions, about how you feel hiking in managed wilderness now, not about which real park you think Mara might be. You can use our hashtag so we can actually see your reflections and maybe weave them into future episodes.
Most of all, remember the real people behind composite stories like this. If you're lighting a candle, hiking a trail, or just scrolling headlines tonight, spare a moment for the names you don't know, the ones whose cars are still sitting in some lot on a file somewhere.
Thank you for spending this time with us in the in-between spaces, between trailheads and tree lines, between open cases and cold files. This has been Rise Stories. Together, we rise.